I welcome you all on behalf of CEC. Today we have with us Professor Jagdish Narayan Singh, who teaches in Rajdhani College, University of Delhi, and his book that we are going to discuss is called Science, War and Imperialism. It's published by Brill Publication, one of the most prestigious publications of the world. We have with us two guests, one from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Professor Deepak Kumar, Center for Education, and Dr. Israt Alam, Member Secretary, Indian Council of Historical Research. Professor Jagdish and Singh, I think this book is one of the best books produced in this field from India, and Indian science movement that started during the colonial period, anti-colonial struggle, has produced a lot of interesting data to be analyzed. And he is one of those historians who have gone through original sources to analyze the trends in the scientific research of that time and what happened to Indian science during the colonial period. I would request him to introduce the book in the next 10 minutes.
The title of the book is Science, War and Imperialism, India and the Second World War. In this book, I have tried to trace and analyze the science policy of the British Indian government during the Second World War. But to make an analysis of the developments of the period, I did have to go into the background, and so before that, almost the whole of 20th century, I have tried to cover. And I have tried to cover several aspects of science and its implication for the society and politics of the time. After the introduction, I have tried to examine the relation between science and empire with reference to India. And in that, I have taken the global view of developments in other parts of the British Empire and also in India, what happened in India, how did the British colonial authorities tackle science in this country. Likewise, after that, I have tried to see the relation between science and war with a special reference to the Second World War. And in that, I have tried to examine different aspects, for example, industrial research, then agriculture, health, technical education, general education with reference to science, and several other areas which didn't come in prominence during that period, but nevertheless they were important, and rather they have been taken up because they were neglected by the British. And after that in the fourth chapter, I have talked about these type of sciences which were left unattended, and I have called that chapter the science in the doldrums. In the fifth chapter, I have talked about science with reference to reconstruction, both before the war, during the war, and a little after the war. And that is a chapter which closely deals with the Indian society, economy, and politics also. And there, on the other side, I also talk about the general policy of the British Empire in relation to the Allied connections and the Second World War. Towards the end, I discuss the British policy towards organizing science in India. And I have discussed about organizations like CSIR and other developments of the period. I have talked about A.B. Hill, his recommendations for how to organize science in India. And finally, there is conclusion in which I have raised certain issues, and though I have concluded my own findings, but I have also raised some questions which may be answered by future researchers. And in that, I have raised also some questions relating to culture, the culture of the West and the culture of the East, the choice of bombarding Japan and not Germany. These type of questions have come. I have also discussed the appropriateness of the science to be taken up in the future after the war, and whether to go the Gandhian way or to go the way of the model of development from the West. These are some of the issues I have talked in this book. This book took a lot of time on my part, and I tried to consult as much original sources as I could. I consulted sources in Britain, in France, in America, and in Canada. And I tried to cover certain information from Canada and America, apart from Britain, for which with which I can make a comparison between the developments in those countries at the Allied powers and India on the other hand.
I think, can you just focus a little bit on the central question that you have raised?
Yes.
The question that you have raised is that during the World War, Second World War, in the British Empire, in Britain actually, the science developed like anything.
Yes.
But in the colonies,
Yeah.
science could not take off.
Yes.
Particularly in India, you are mentioning that
Yes.
in India, the way British designed its science policy in India, it was part of the state ideology.
Yeah.
But it never allowed the scientists to take on the original researches.
Yes.
And in fact, it was used as a backyard of
Yeah.
the lab that was
Yeah.
in Britain.
Yes.
So can you focus on this thesis? How did you argue for this?
As you have referred, that during the Second World War, in several of the developed countries who were the allies of the British Empire, science developed a lot there, including the basic and fundamental sciences. As for example, in Canada, there was a lot of progress there. Then in USA and also in Britain, but it didn't happen in India. Why it didn't happen? There are several factors responsible for that, and definitely one factor at that time was there were two important factors. First, that by 1939, the British were very much sure that they are not going to continue in this country. This was the one factor. So they didn't want to invest, they didn't want to plan in long term. They were not interested because they were going to leave this country. Another thing was that the war demanded a different type of policy for science, in which required a lot of freedom on the part of the scientists, which the British couldn't afford. They couldn't allow the Indian scientists to work on their part, and not only that, they had a lot of suspicion about their intentions also. For example, when M.N. Saha he went on a scientific mission, he was followed by intelligence people, and at several places the Indian scientific mission was not allowed to visit certain important scientific installations in Canada, even in USA, even in Britain, they were not allowed. But the best illustration of this type of discrimination is the TISART mission. The TISART mission, it started from Britain in 1940. I think it was August and September. And it was a secret mission to explore the possibilities of science for winning the war, how to win the war with the help of science and technology under the Allied cooperation. But the mission totally sidelined India. It didn't consult. In fact, it didn't give any information to the Indian government or the people about that mission that secretly that visited USA and Canada, and also they invited Canada, which was not a colony in the real sense of the term at that time, but they made a collaboration with Canada, and the Canadian scientists participated in their secret programs, but no Indian scientist was allowed to do like that. So this was a clear discrimination. And what I want to suggest that the British were, for different reasons, they were not interested to make any further invested either in terms of economy and or policy in India, because they were sure that we are going to leave this country. One thing. Another thing, there was also fear that if we collaborate with the Indian scientists, they are motivated by nationalism, and so they may leak the information to other belligerent countries, Axis powers or something like that. So they were very much afraid of that, and they wouldn't allow the Indian scientists, especially the socialist scientists led by M.N. Saha. That was a problem, because by this time the British were very much afraid of Russian design also, especially the spread of socialism in this country. And Saha, he was a frightening name for them, and Saha was extremely vocal at this time. Meanwhile, there was the 1942 movement, Quit India movement. All the Indian leaders were sent behind the bar, important leaders, and there was a simple doldrum-like situation. There were other things, factors like the famine, then there were the upheavals due to communal problems, etc. So at that time also the pressure from the Indian political leaders, it lessened. There was no pressure on them, but definitely the agenda of the Indian National Congress and all the nationalist leaders, that was automatically, in a natural, spontaneous way, that was taken over by the scientists, led, which is now called Science and Culture Group, at that time led by M.N. Saha. And they took up the matter, they organized symposium, but all these things were just at the level of symposium and writings in the newspaper or journals, etc., because they were not the part of the whole establishment, so they couldn't do much. So these were some of the basic factor, but there are other things also.
Well, I'll come back to this question once again, particularly the idea that you are giving, that there is a relationship between science and culture.
Yeah.
I'll come back to that, but in the meantime, I would like Principal Kumar to raise his issues.
Thank you. I must first congratulate the author for a very well drafted, based on solid research, primary data, a book which has contemporary relevance. Going through its pages, we can draw lessons which would be useful for planning our society and economy in this century as well. Well, Dr. Sinha begins his explorations with raising certain questions about the relationship between science, empire, and of course one of the major event which a imperial scenario contains, that's the major war, Second World War. But but it is not that you have concentrated only on a very small period. Your work goes back to late 19th century as well. Your questions are relevant for an appreciation and understanding of late 19th and early 20th century. And gradually you move towards a more focused discussion on the interwar period and the war. You stop around the time of independence. So it's a very, very significant contribution. Thanks a lot for giving us, enlightening us. However, certain questions may emerge, may come up to ordinary minds, to people. They may ask you, when you talk in terms of empire, colonialism, imperialism, empire, sometimes you use it interchangeably, and the role of science in it. technology in it. Well, one thing which is quickly comes to mind is colonialism, or for that matter, imperialism, which is much more organized, is no philanthropy. So why should they?
Yes.
Why should you expect also
Yeah.
that they should have done this for you, that for you? And why should they? If they sideline,
Of course, we will expect it and let them not give it.
No, one of the reasons I would like to
Yeah.
give as a political
I don't want to
scientist,
provoke you.
as a
Yes.
political scientist, I think one of the reasons that you could easily capture is that because they were claiming to be just.
Yes.
See, they were liberal. They were saying
Yeah,
that
they
we
were
are civil on the
liberal.
civilizing
Yeah,
mission.
yeah,
If
yeah.
they are claiming so much, then we can expect from them. If they claim that well, we have come here to exploit you, we don't mind. But they are coming and saying that we are civilizing, we are giving you knowledge and everything, but then you are hiding it. So that's it.
Well, my own government also claims a great deal. They work on our behalf, they work for me.
Therefore,
And you can see right now debate going on, Jokpal and Lokpal and all sorts of
And
things.
Deepak, to add, I would like to add a point.
job of the
a
government
point
is to
of
claim.
information that one of the most reputed journal in the field of history of science, they have reviewed my book. I am not naming it here. And the reviewer, probably a British, he says that there was no basic development and fundamental development in science in Britain. Can we agree with that? He says, he has written in black and white that this comparison is irrelevant. Why the development was neither in Britain nor in India, and they were just in that way.
No, actually,
Which is not true.
no,
Which is not true, and I think British can't take it so
this
easily.
is what the Cambridge
And
school.
despite the fact that I have given a lot of information
Yes, yes.
about what in Britain was going on, Postan's book references there and all, a lot of user he must have read, but he had totally denied. He must be a professor or something like
this.
this.
This is part of a very well thought out.
Yeah.
The whole Cambridge school
Yes.
wants to whitewash.
Yeah.
They would say, "Oh, look, we were ourselves inferior to the Germans.
yeah.
How could I give you something?"
Yeah.
The Germans were leading the way. The Americans were leading. The British science, this whole decline theory, is based on this premise to save their own skin.
Yeah.
It was in decline, so what could we provide to the colony? Rather, we looked forward to the colony for greater
But
import.
what he
for
has
this.
And under
written,
the-
that is a blatant lie in a way. Yeah, that's not true.
It's part of the political propaganda. War propaganda.
I can
always
agree
go
with you
together.
that why do we expect from
Now
them?
there is a methodological problem also. Now there is a section of scholars who are reducing even Needham's works.
Yes.
Yes, they are decrying that. They are saying that Needham has not done something extraordinary for China,
Yeah.
and Chinese civilization was not as great as the Needham claims to
Yes.
be. And it is within their group, the modern editors who have succeeded.
Yes.
I won't say this about Kuhn, but others. They are saying that there is no development as such which Needham had seen.
Yeah.
So that kind of debate is there, which is again inspired with this postmodernist.
To that, I will again add from another review of a very reputed journal from Britain, and the reviewer says that Sinha doesn't ask any question other than Needham's. And this is a very traditional question, almost meaning irrelevant question. And she has also referred to Deepak Kumar, that this is the question Deepak Kumar had asked and Needham had asked, and it is not new thing. Yes.
Yeah, I remember it says that Sina follows that tradition.
Yeah.
But what's harm in that? So far it is based on facts.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
where is the
Well, tradition has its own advantages. There
Yeah.
is nothing wrong in. The point is that you have rather enriched the tradition.
Yeah.
And a question doesn't become irrelevant because it has been asked earlier. The same question retains in
Yeah.
generation after generation, generation after generation, and it becomes more poignant rather
Yeah.
with the changing times.
Times.
Yeah, and
With the
changing
new
And a
requirements.
larger understanding of the
changing
whole thing.
perception,
Yeah,
changing
yeah.
the
The new
erudition
materials.
of the scholar himself.
Yes.
And exposure to the new
Yeah.
materials,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
can further be raised a
Yes.
similar question that's
Yeah,
confirming
yeah.
that.
And not only new materials, the changing scenario. For example, today, globalization has become a very, very,
Yeah.
buzzword.
Yeah.
Globalization, privatization.
Yeah.
Now you will see the roots of several of these problems relating to privatization, globalization in this book also.
In this
Yes, I've
For
talked
example,
about,
Madan Mohan Malviya is talked about.
Yeah.
Now, when Malvi establishes a university, or MAO College becomes a university in 1920s and so forth, and several other attempts are made by the Indians to develop citadels of fundamental research or provide them platform, etc. These all began as a private effort. But can we today, the way privatization is going on, can we, equate Syed Ahmad or Mahamana with Jindal and Ambani's? I mean, we can learn what privatization means. Globalization talking about. Who can be more globalized than Tagore? You have talked about him here.
Yes.
Who can be more... and globalization has always been multiculturalism. Today West talks of multiculturalism. It has been in our genes.
Yes.
And it is reflected in our quest for scientific knowledge.
Yes.
Science is not only a method or a way of doing certain or discovering new knowledge, etc. Science is culture.
Yes.
And our culture had been a scientific and rational culture. Despite all the superstition, which of course we are aware of and which every society has. I mean, the German society also has, the Americans also have their own superstitions.
The World War occurred because of this superstition.
Because of this.
That brings us to this question of culture and science. There are two interesting formulations in this one can think of. One, of course, is that science was developing there. We were also scientific, but superstitions developed in our area. And then we actually could not do that kind of development as the West did. And probably also we did not institutionalize our research. It was more or less in the private domain, and we could not really have that kind of modern institution of research in the early period. The other formulation is that actually the kind of science that was developing in Europe was Newtonian science. It was highly influenced by Cartesian dualism. So therefore it really could not take into account the kind of science that India could have developed. And so whatever we were developing and whatever we were doing, which was thrown into the basket of superstition, in fact was a different kind of scientific understanding of the reality as a totality. And that they could not stand. Like if you have seen this film on Eddington and Einstein, it's a very interesting film in which the whole difficulty of Einstein between the world wars was shown, that how the British government and British Science Academy was not ready to fund to Eddington for a research which was actually being theoretically formulated by Einstein. So it was a kind of hegemonic dominance of the Newtonian science that did not allow the Indian mind to enter into this domain. As somewhere our science, even at that, or scientific knowledge, even at that time, was mixed with what they called religion. We call culture.
Even despite colonial situation and oppressive socio-cultural situation within courts, despite all these hindrances, you will have the instance of one Satyen Bose. For the first time, he brings Einstein into light by translating his works from German to English. It is Satyen Bose who does that.
Oh, I see.
Yes, it is Satyen Bose who does that. He brings Einstein to English knowing world. And not only that, he collaborates with him and produces a fundamentally original equation, which is still known as boson theory. Bose-Einstein theory. So in a colonial situation, even then, despite all the problems, now we couldn't build upon that gradually. The question would come later.
And that's where the role of the state comes
The
actually.
state comes, that's right. Earlier, pre-colonial state was a different state. It was not a modern state. Okay, it was not a welfare state. It had its own, advantages and disadvantages. Moreover, that state had not percolated to the hinterland. It was, it has a paraphernalia, a bureaucracy, a mansabdari system, etc. But it was not sucking blood from every nook and corner of the country, which a colonial state was doing. Okay. Despite our the deficiencies of the pre-colonial state, we had enormous scientific tradition in terms of mathematics, in terms of medicine, in terms of astronomy. There was a Kerala school of mathematics, 14th century to 18th century, very strong mathematical tradition. Now, these traditions developed responding to requirements of the then existing society and the milieu. You can't throw the baby with the bathwater saying that it was all humbug. Even if it didn't pass the test of Baconian and Descartesian test,
Yes.
doesn't mean that they were useless.
That's the point.
So, that they were useless. Even today, they need not be thrown.
Yeah.
Of course, scientific revolution, before that, Renaissance, etc., were remarkable human
Art of human
heritage,
progress, yeah.
progress and civilization. No one denies it. But and who knows to what extent Indo-Islamic world had contributed to that
Yeah.
Renaissance.
It has
It
contributed.
has
There
contributed.
is no
It is
question of,
well
there is no doubt
documented.
about
There is no
that.
doubt
Yes,
about it.
yeah.
We have
Yeah.
contributed. So all the contributions have gone through, and which say
Yeah.
that it is we contributed as like tributaries to the ocean of knowledge. So no one can claim
Yeah.
a patent over a particular. However, it is the colonial process which makes certain things appear distant and redundant,
Yeah.
and it makes certain things very vibrant,
Vibrant.
useful, utilitarian,
Yeah.
and so forth.
Yeah.
This continued whole of 19th century, but in 20th century, to which your book is primarily devoted to, there was a greater realization of the world coming together, the world of knowledge contributing to each other, the relevance of science and technology for society. A new culture was also emerging.
Yeah.
This was a culture which had been informed by several reform movements
Yes.
like Brahma Samaj, etc., which had been informed by a political awakening from late 19th century onward, social churning, and this culture of 20th century, which finally resulted in our independence, was duly recognized. It duly recognized, this culture duly recognized the significance of new knowledge which we call scientific knowledge, technical knowledge, the tools, etc.
But Professor Kumar, tell me, and I would like to address this to you also, what is the difference, do you think, the fundamental difference between the indigenous science movement that we saw in the during the anti-colonial struggle and the modern science of the West? Is there any epistemological difference between the two?
No, there is a little of confusion there. Indigenous science movement, do you mean that the traditional science or the indigenous movement taking up modern science also? Because in the 20s and 30s, 40s, there is a very strong movement based on modern science, led by Saha and others. And there is not much of indigenous science, traditional science, though there are some patrons of that also in Ayurveda, there are movements.
Hakim Ajmal Khan.
Even
Yes.
Gandhi was talking of
Gandhi
alternative
is
science.
the best leader of
The
that.
alternative
Yeah,
science.
Gandhi is talking, and that brings that question of just simple method of medicine and procedures of health care, that brings into question certain very important issues connected with modern science and the Indian science, and that question converges on cultural understanding of things also. Gandhi, he says that I won't accept any science that doesn't satisfy the emotions of man. A very
That is-
subtle level.
That's the anti-Cartesian punch.
No, but here I would like to make a humble submission. If you go through Hindu Swaraj and even the writings in Harijan and Young India, you will see Gandhi seldom uses the word science
Yes.
or even technology.
Yeah.
He uses the word machine.
Machine.
He all the
Machine,
time attacks
Yes,
machine.
machine,
And then he acknowledges that I'm not against machine per se. I know even my body is a kind
Yeah.
of machine.
Even the charkha is a machine.
Yeah,
he says,
charkha is a machine. He says charkha is a
rather a
machine.
very delicate machine, he says.
And my own body is also a machine.
Machine.
That shows that he is not opposed to
Yeah.
Cartesian, mechanistic view. What he is opposing is the greed which propels mechanization. Is the
No,
greed.
can I just submit my this thing? See, my body is a machine, but then unlike Descartes, he would say that it also has Atma.
Yeah.
So when somebody asks, why are you doing this? He would simply say, he would never say that my body is demanding this. He would say, my Atma is saying this. So that location of the Atma within the body is not the Cartesian understanding.
No. It is very much Sanatana. In a
That's
sense,
right,
he
yeah.
describes himself as a Sanatana. I don't
Yeah.
call him a Hindu.
Yeah.
So he's a Sanatana, and the perennial certain values which he
Yeah.
thinks of soul searching. He
Yeah.
he talks of spirit.
Yeah.
He talks in terms of but this soul should be equated more with morality
Yes.
and ethics.
Ethics.
Today we are talking of bioethics.
Yeah.
How can you have biology running?
Yeah.
You can't allow them to play
Also,
God.
we talk about political ethics.
If we
and a lot
allow
of
the
ethics.
genetics to go to unbridled
Yes.
extent,
Professor Kumar,
what will happen?
Sorry, I would like to insist on this point that I'm making. Look what the problem social science is facing today. The language of social science that we are talking about has failed to capture the whole range of feelings that human beings do have. So therefore you see what Professor Guru is talking about, the epistemological, experiential epistemology.
Yes.
The experience that I have, the gaze that
Of humiliation.
of humiliation. How do you document that in the language of the modern social science,
Yeah.
or in the language of the modern science? Therefore, this Cartesian thing has always found a problem in Indian culture, and in fact, people like Russell, who said that,
Yes, sir, no problem.
who he says that, who generally has a big problem with any religion,
Yeah.
but he says that what is called the Hindu philosophy is very close to science.
Yes.
He has made this statement.
Yeah. Yeah.
And many of the German philosophers, in fact, they accessed Indian tradition
Yeah.
in order to counter that kind of Cartesian.
Yeah. For example, yes, the great nuclear physicist talks about it. Professor D.S. Kothari always referred to him.
Exactly.
Heisenberg. J.B.S. Haldane came and settled in India itself. But
So,
but
what is that epistemological difference?
but
And
the-
does your book actually capture that also? Or we are just thinking, as we have right to think, that, well, the modern science that developed there could not develop in our society just because of the colonial state? Or was it culture? That's the point I'm trying to harp on.
Yes.
Was it the cultural difference that we had, where we thought of, like
Yeah.
Einstein, people say that Einstein could develop that argument because he was actually a Jew. So culture has a deep
Sinas,
connection
how
with
you
science.
tell us. This is a very
Yes,
difficult
yes.
question. Culture or colonialism?
I have discussed both of the issues.
Yeah.
About colonialism and imperialism, I have talked in detail, which I will just give the impression of that. And about the culture, because it couldn't develop because this culture was different, I have also reflected on that, but not with elaboration, much elaboration. What I have talked about, the latter factor, is that science developed in a particular geocultural region can't be exactly transferred in another culture, and it can't have a natural growth there.
That's very nice.
That I have written in this
Very
book.
nice.
It's not possible,
But you-
because it is good for England, it can't be good for India.
But does that
no, but
mean
Dr.
that
Sinha-
India will have its own kind of science?
It may have its own
That's the
kind of
point, yeah.
science, yes. And not me, rather Gunatilke, Susant Gunatilke, he has closely studied this whole problem. And he says that had there been no colonial state in India, the Indian science might have developed on a different model, which was different from the West. And he touches upon something like saying our science was something intuitive science.
Very nice, yeah.
And that intuitive science doesn't mean that it is just a bogus thing. No. He says that brain arranges a lot of things which you don't know, and it analyzes, and then comes the intuition. Intuition doesn't come from the blue. It doesn't come all of a sudden. There is some data feeding in your brain already, accumulating for a very long time, and so there is intuition. So he's talking about intuition. He gives the example of Indian mathematician that
Ramanujan.
they don't remember the whole equation stage-wise, but they will tell the answer because his brain
Mind
is
condition-
working.
condition
And
mind.
he also emphasizes that this type of tradition has been seen mostly in the Asian cultures.
Asian culture. That's the point.
Yes.
You agree with Guntal?
To some
You agree?
extent.
And to some extent, it's
Yes.
very qualified. Not to large extent.
Nah, yet
but
not.
But
you
you
know,
don't agree with him.
at least
No,
at
You don't
least
seem to agree with him.
you know, people.
I would like to agree with him.
Yeah.
I would like to agree with Gonzalo.
People argue. Many people argue that Indo-Islamic culture was deficient. That is one of the reasons why we were colonized.
Yeah.
We were colonized not because of one damn Clive or one poor Sirajuddaulah losing a battle. We were colonized because there was a massive intellectual failure in 17th, 18th century. We are aware of, we know the deficiencies. There is nothing wrong in putting light on ourselves, in saying that, I remember there was long ago, 25 years ago, I met Professor Ray, who was at that time chairman of ICHR, and I began as an anti-colonial and talked about how the colonial state was responsible for this and that and so. He listened to me for 20 minutes and half an hour, and then very politely said, "Deepak, why don't you put showed the lamp, the lamp, put the light on yourself also. Why don't you criticize your own society, your own self, before you blame others? Colonialism is dead. Why keep flogging the old horse, etc." However, I immediately recoiled and saw some sense in his argument. Gradually, it set me thinking. Now, I do not agree that colonialism is a dead horse. Therefore, stop flogging. Colonialism, in some form or the other, still continues. It will, in a different form. Domination will always be there. Whoever controls the power, the cutting edge knowledge, will dominate you. It's as simple as that. Now, this is number one. Number two, however, we should not take something, make a fetish of something, which probably Gandhi was guilty of. A great man, Gandhi, no doubt about it. But he was a political leader he had to rouse the masses. So he would claim, oh, there were beautiful schools in pre-colonial India, everybody
that
had this and
true.
that.
Yes,
and he wouldn't be able to, come up with the convincing proof. So Gandhi had his own difficulties also, which Tagore didn't face. Tagore is on a different plane. Tagore is a person where all the boundaries are melting. And at the same time, an exceptionally modern man. Here he is traditional as well as exceptionally modern person, the modern outlook and views. So that is the thing, when the culture is not to be taken neat. Culture is not something which is, very, which can be emotionally we feel attached to it. But there are certain areas which we need to say that something had gone wrong. In the total Indo-Islamic culture, something had, and today also the requirement is to boldly say and thereby rectify it. I'm not asking that the pendulum should swing to another extreme, that you ape West and become totally westernized. That I'm not arguing. But there are certain deficiencies which need to be recognized, be it caste, be it, after all, thanks to this caste, which P.C. Ray says, that thanks to this caste, that there was a distinction between head and the hand. So you threw the potter, who could have been our technologists. We threw the carpenter, we threw our blacksmiths on the periphery of the society. Vishwakarma is a lowly god. Who worships Vishwakarma? Our society, had we worshipped Vishwakarma, we would have been better engineer society. We would have produced probably better tools. What do we do in my culture? In my
Deepak, I think I have. Sorry.
I want to say something about that. I'm not saying that we shouldn't look at our past tradition and culture. There were a lot of lacunas in our culture also, but for that there were different reasons. Some of them very vital reasons also. What I suggest, that it doesn't matter that Ayurveda was not developed at that time, and if we claim that that was the panacea for everything, this is a foolish thing. If you follow several of the Ayurvedic treatments, you will die. Today we know, because scientific development has come forward in the meanwhile, and that time, especially on account of foreign rule, all these indigenous sciences, they went in the hiding, and so there was no development. But what at the time when they were flourishing, in comparison to the world development, that was quite impressive. That we should agree.
That's one very important point.
Yes. And after that it fell back, due to foreign invasion and whatever the reasons were there. Also, some of our cultural traits, as Deepak said about caste system, that has been a great hindrance, because the caste system was generating a science or technology of a particular type that was serving a particular segment of society, not the society at large. So it was a great lacuna. It was a bad thing on part. But since we had development from that time, we can make up all these things which were.
Let me make a point.
And Deepak, let me add another thing about the European scientist. If I'm recalling exactly, it was perhaps Mago. And you had made the reference of Meadow, and I saw his original diaries in London. And if I recall exactly, it was Mago who is writing about the treatment of smallpox in India. And he is describing in his private diary that they know some technique, these Indians know some techniques to how to cure Chechak.
Oh yeah.
And
They knew.
but I never saw any article written by him or anyone else on this topic. That Indians also know. It was something like hiding. They were just hiding the matter. Otherwise, they should have written. I didn't find anything like that.
There are 2 points. One is the politics of knowledge, which I'll come towards the end.
Yes.
Which is very crucial, I think.
Yeah.
But more important than that, I think what you're suggesting is that probably we have accepted that we had some deficit. I would say something differently, the same thing differently, or something else. I would say that now when the science has reached to a level when science itself is being redefined, with the new developments in science, the chaos theory particularly, the way it is redefining itself, the way Penrose kind of people are suggesting that unless we understand consciousness, science has not developed at all.
Yeah.
And do we have a different kind of epistemology which was actually taking the concept of the real so differently that the modern science, the paradigm of the modern science, could not even understand what we were saying. And what they called us as deficit, now it is being proved, or now people are appreciating that the Indian knowledge system do have certain things, certain resources, which are very, very valuable for human beings. Now they are trying to discover that.
You know, sir,
I'll give just 2 examples.
Yeah.
Just 2 examples. That Indian logic system.
Yeah.
They thought that we are irrational people, we are emotional people. Now Oxford is teaching Nyaya logic, thinking that Nyaya is much bigger in advance, much an advance over Aristotelian logic. You have Sankhya, which talks about consciousness, and the epistemology of consciousness of Sankhya is much more powerful than the consciousness epistemology has been developed by Freud or even others. And that brings to the issue of politics. You know, Jung or Zung, however you pronounce it, when he came to India, he wrote a lot of articles about the understanding of consciousness in India, the understanding of mind and consciousness. When he was going back, before he left India, almost there was a big threat of his removal from the psychoanalytic community. And the last essay he wrote, that whatever I wrote in India, I was overwhelmed by looking at things. These are not serious essays.
Oh no! Oh, poor thing. Yes, sir.
He mentioned that.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, if you look at Hegel, who used to attend Humboldt's lectures on Nyaya, but when somebody asked him, how do you think of Indian philosophy, he said it is in its childhood. So surprisingly, there is a serious problem of politics of knowledge, which probably was guided by the Newtonian model of understanding. They thought that whatever we were doing was superstition, because it was not proved by experimental science.
Yes.
And now we know that experiment, as Popper argues and Roy Bhaskar argues, finally, that regularity is neither a necessary condition for being science nor a sufficient condition for being science. So the model of science itself has changed. So how do you think of this?
Well, you have raised a very, very fundamental question, politics of knowledge and how this. Now, politics of knowledge has always been part of civilizational growth. You gave instances from our ancient scientific literature. Nobody disputes the significance of Sankhya or Nyaya logic or Kanad's Anuvada and many things. So you will find in seed form many ideas which took another few centuries to grow. Now, in between, you have other string of scholars. You have Ibn Haytham, you have Ibn Sina, you have Al-Razi, 9th century to 12th century, you have number of scholars in Arabia who wrote in Arabic, who not only preserved Greek knowledge but also incorporated Indian knowledge systems, and thereby enriched the whole corpus. So
Ibn al-Arabi is there.
Arabic, yeah. In all these cases, you will find sometime the seed has grown to this extent, has become a plant, but didn't become a tree. Okay, it remained a plant, or it moved up to a particular point, then stunted. In India, we never had the tradition, probably both in India and the Islamic world, including the Sino-Chinese world also, we didn't have the tradition of what Kuhn may call paradigm shift. We had a tradition of incremental knowledge. We used to write commentaries. So on Charaka Samhita, there are dozens of Nigandus being written. Commentaries. In Islamic system also, we always wrote commentaries. So Al-Qanun is one canonized text. On Al-Qanun, there would be commentary after commentary. Till 20th century, people are writing.
Even now.
Okay, now Al-Qanun will continue, and we would continue to be inspired by that. This is a very valid way of developing knowledge. There is nothing wrong in it. However, the change which West saw and sought and successfully implemented was in introducing a type of questioning spirit, why and how, which hit at the very roots of canonical knowledge. In India today, even now you will see people with all the rings and people Surjagrahan taking bath and so forth. We all know that there is no Rahu there, but all of us, would love to believe. I mean, you need a Rahu to run.
No, again, I have problem on it.
We are going to very high levels of philosophy of knowledge. We should come to the
And
book
yes,
also.
to the book.
The point.
But Deepakji, we also blame the British
No,
for
Sasa-
bypassing the non-Sanskrit literature and achievements
that's
of the time of medieval times. They are not talking about that. Some of them must be knowing about that. I
Why
can't say
should
that
they?
Why
It
should
doesn't suit their imperial
because
at the same
what
time,
he
why
said
should
that
Sinas
they
are
were
at the
trying to be just.
They are the
They're
people
saying,
who are
they're claiming to be just.
these
don't
Orientalists are the
accept.
people who are behind, whatever collection of knowledge is there.
Yeah.
Asiatic Society was found by them, and they were translating our scientific texts also to make it known to the Western world. Deepak Saab was raising a very good point, and you also raised that point. The point is where this is a very good intervention in between. The point is that he is taking it to wider horizon also, Indo-Islamic world,
Yes.
which covers a very large part of the humanity.
Yes.
And these were in this part, a definite tradition of scientific knowledge was developing.
Yes.
Now, when we come to with Ghazali in Islamic world, there is the onslaught on reason and rationalism. That is one thing which the Britishers are not responsible. We are responsible, and that attack on reason and rationalism contributed to the stultification of development of scientific.
Even Abul Fazl acknowledges
Fazl
it.
says
He
that.
says it is
I
the
Abul
agree
Fazl
taqleed.
with
says
you.
that
Yes.
Taqleed.
when the wind of taqleed is blowing,
No, what can we
aql
do?
is receding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Knowledge is receding.
Akal piche ho gaya.
So that this kind of the development, the question arises. That was my point when I was coming. I was just wondering, because I read your book. It's a marvelous book on this theme. Where did we diverge? We had our own tradition of development of scientific knowledge. Where did we diverge, and how far the Britishers were responsible for making this divergence more pronounced? So that was my question. I wanted to ask you. Do you think of course the colonialism has its impact on science, but at the same time you see England did not have an engineering college of the kind they developed in Roorkee.
Yes.
Roorkee doesn't find a mention in your book, so I was looking for that.
Yes.
And British engineers, they were trained for making bridges in between, they were trained in India. So what could be the possible reason for that?
No, the first their immediate requirement it was for at Roorkee they created an engineering college for civil engineers because they wanted to create roads and the bridges, etc. So even their buildings, their offices. So there it was immediate need. So they created it here at Roorkee, at Shivpur and other places, at Chitranjan, because they wanted to develop railways. So it was urgent necessity of the British Empire and colonialism and their business.
Yeah, that,
And the byproduct was that we got some
we
institutions.
got the institutions.
that brings
Like the
us,
railways, the Gandhi railways.
that brings us closer to the question of utilitarians.
Yes,
If they have a utility.
yes.
So did the science or scientific investigations in India had any utility for the imperial design?
No, it didn't
Did
have
you-
much.
did you-
Didn't have much, but it doesn't mean that it didn't have no use at all. For example, the Tivya system, the Ayurveda, despite the fact that the Western science came, medical science came to India, even today, people in the villages they follow the Tivya system and Ayurveda. If you have Zukam, you have Kadha of Tulsi.
In towns, it is more.
Delhi.
Now it is in towns more
Germany.
popular.
Yeah.
So
Sujata
my
tells me that in Germany they are translating the whole thing.
So a lot of things have relevance at that time and even now.
Well,
I am
no,
not
yeah.
saying that their science was inferior, but their science was motivated to exploit a great segment of
Exactly.
people in this country.
And not only in this country.
We didn't require that of science. Of course, some of the components they were useful for us also. So we expected the roads, the railways, the bridges, and all other things.
Another point to which this book I find very significant is the question of war, on which we haven't
Yes.
talked about.
Yeah.
We should have. War is a crucial word which he uses.
Yes.
It's central
Now,
word.
we didn't have war for a long time. The wars we thought of was, which Aurangzeb carried little bit here and there, which were hardly, in that
War of
sense, a
that,
war.
yeah.
These were
Dimension,
small
yeah.
wars
Yeah.
with some mountain rats, etc. or
this
Sirajuddaulah was hardly, Palasi
No,
was
but,
hardly a war.
When this war was, between Babur and our Indian rulers, Lodhis, there was a significant. They
Yeah,
were
that was a
introducing
significant.
technology.
Another significant war was with Tipu.
Yeah.
When Tipu uses his ban,
Rocket, yeah.
rockets,
Yeah.
Tipu's ban. But after Tipu,
Yeah.
for another 200 years, I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
see any war in
Yes,
India
yes,
situation.
yes.
So here, this war which intervenes in Europe, and how war adds to the development of new
Arsenal,
technologies,
yeah.
arsenal, lot of new science and technology has emerged out of military requirements.
Yes.
Today in India, people may claim, I don't know how much DRDO
Yeah,
serves
yeah,
us,
yeah.
but well, I'm not a war monger.
Warmonger,
I'm
the
glad
point
that
is-
there were no wars.
point
I'm
is
happy
that-
with it without being
There was
I'd
better
like
war
to.
on the mental
But,
level,
but the thing is that here, when you talk of war, you have in many cases, instances cited, how war was useful.
Yeah.
For that, and rather you regret the fact that Indians were not given their share in that booty.
Yeah, yeah.
That they regretted
Though-
No, in
that.
though-
fact, yes, this point, which Dr. Jain Sinha has raised very nicely, I was amused, I would say, reading this chapter on aeronautics, how this Walchand family and the
Yeah,
Walchand,
yeah,
the gentleman,
Yes.
how they took interest in that and how they, but somewhere I find that, you are talking as if in terms of, missed opportunities,
Yes.
that we missed that.
Yes. In fact, there is a subheading also, something like missed opportunities or something during the war.
missed
What
I wish.
happened in case of India? That Britain realized that India is a place which can be made a base for the British Empire to fight the war. They agreed. But after that, once the British were uprooted from there or being uprooted from there was another economic intervention from USA. They invited Grady. Grady came here. He was asked to report on how to use the Indian resources for the war. When he came here, he toured the country and he reported that first Indians should be provided food and clothing. and India should be first developed, then only we can make use of the Indian resources. This was a very peculiar situation which put the British in an embarrassing situation, that he is a friend and he is talking against us, something like that, and there was a lot of commotion. And then there was an American lobby which advocated the independence of the country. That's a long story. There were
India provided only cannon
secret
fodders,
communications,
not cannons.
which
We
were
provided cannon
intercepted
fodders.
by
Our
the
army.
British here.
This India Gate is a monument to the cannon fodders which we provided.
Yes.
All the names are given in First
So
World War,
what
Second World War.
what,
My people were dying.
Isar Sahab, what I was suggesting, that due to this intervention from outside, for example from USA, what opportunities could arise in India, and it could have been addressed by Indian sources that couldn't materialize, because America offered that I will provide all the technology to you, tractors and trucks and all, they were imported here, aeroplanes and whatnot, under allied cooperation. So again there was another factor which stopped the opportunity from realization. That was a problem.
That was export of technology.
Yes,
So Britain
yes.
is one, the
Yeah,
other is
so
in
you
America.
can't, you do not need to have any technology. We are exporting to you. Not only that, in some cases, take for example oil exploration. Since the British were knowing that they are leaving this country, so they assigned this job not to Indian agencies, rather to other agencies either from Britain or USA to oblige them. And they prospected the whole of the Indian oil. And at that time, Amin Saha, he raised a great slogan that this is oil imperialism. At that time, he talked about oil imperialism. Yeah, it's coming to India. He warned the country that be aware of that. At that time, it's very remarkable. Yeah.
But they had, formed this Geological Survey of India thing.
They had formed,
And Big Boy
but
was excavated by them.
very interesting thing, during the war, they closed the activity of the Survey of India. Yes, they closed it.
Why?
It means it's not known. In fact, Amin Saha also writes, due to mysterious reasons, they have closed it. But what I guess, they didn't find any need for that, any prospecting, any knowing anything more about India, because we are going.
leaving.
What is the matter that we
tendencies
should?
that they
They
develop.
closed the activities
No,
of
but this
Survey of
feeling,
India.
Jansen sir, this feeling was not right from the beginning that they are leaving. Otherwise, Gandhi would not have to struggle so much. This could be a reason.
They would
but
have continued.
Yeah.
No, I'm
No,
talking
it
about
was becoming
40s.
costly. I think he's right. But
Yeah,
what is
I'm
the-
talking 35 onwards.
35
35
onwards.
onwards.
I think
Yeah.
30, you rightly said 30
Yeah.
onwards, they
Yeah.
start having feeling that we had to leave the country
No,
because
but
it was
Big,
burdensome.
Big Boy was dug when?
Huh?
It was Big Boy oil,
Yeah.
oil field was dug when?
When
When was it?
Oh,
No, I
1890.
can't say. I can't say.
1890,
Yes,
19th century,
earlier.
the first
So
one.
they were interested, but
Earlier,
think-
not after
Earlier.
30s, not after 30s.
Not after 40.
That's what the point he's making.
Yes,
That's
not
the
after
basic point.
40.
Not at the time of the Second World War, they had.
Not only that, they closed all the projects concerned with the development of railways. Not only that, they uprooted the railway lines and they sent
Want
it
to
to
take them
Africa.
away. They want to take them away.
Africa.
Ajay, Dr. Sinha, now tell me, do you think that a war-like situation is good for science and technology in India?
Unfortunately,
Would you
it
like
is
more
good.
war
No.
to-
Unfortunately.
Or would you give more credence to
the
DRDO and-
war forces a man to do something
creative.
extraordinary in a very limited span of time. So you are pressed in that, and very paradoxically,
But
and
Did,
Also,
did
Professor-
1962 produce this? This 1965 produce this? Any change in Indian
it
creativity in
did.
Indian
yeah,
science
but
and
you are
technology?
raising a very serious question,
Ah,
which
let-
we'll
let me ask.
discuss later on
No,
sometime.
But no,
maybe
tell me
somebody
one
should
thing.
Tell
No.
me,
Yeah.
did
Do you think-
1962
Yeah,
produce?
I'm
We were
talk-
beaten to pulp.
Deepak-
In 1960,
uh,
65 also was a small victory.
Yes.
Fine, we had our
Deepak
NAT machine,
ji,
etc.
that is the question that needs to be addressed. It's a very significant
But
question.
Why not?
But
Why
how-
it happened?
Is it because of the legacy of the colonial policy of the
I
science?
That would be
can't say
second volume.
exactly. I can't say exactly.
That could be second
But tell me
volume.
one
but,
thing,
but
what you-
I'm talking about that there were some benefits that was shared by India also. For instance, during the war, they brought the antibiotics, then radiotherapy, then X-ray. All these things were brought to India. But also they brought the RDX, which is now being used for explosions. Yes.
That is, that is
The jeep,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
is
jeep.
the-
They brought the jeep also.
Two more things, and
Yeah.
I think we are running short of
Yeah.
time now. One, that do you think
Yeah.
science developed under the heavy burden of war is a science which humanity doesn't require?
Yes.
In fact, we need to develop a science,
Yes, yes.
science at the peace time.
Yes,
One.
yeah.
Second, how far do you think,
Yeah.
or how do you look at the Indian science policy today?
Yeah. Let me answer the first question. I will rather remember J.D. Bernal and M.N. Saha. They say and they believe that earlier we used to think that science can develop under the pressure of the war. But after the reconstruction program in Russia, it is now evident that science can be developed also in peacetime. If there is a backup political will behind that and there is a definite program, science can be developed. This is the answer for your first question. The second question, I have mixed feeling about that. Our science is not very relevant, or at least it is not proving relevant at the grassroots level. And no, sir, for that even the scientists are responsible. Before independence, the scientists used to talk about social and political problems, but I don't remember any scientist after independence having talked about the socio-political problems of the country
Now even the-
in a strong manner. I don't know any
Even
scientist.
social scientists have stopped
Yes.
talking.
Yeah, they have stopped also that. Yes.
We have all accepted our fate like
Yes.
That's true. That's true. Anything else you want to say? We have a couple of minutes more.
No, nothing. If you
concluding
ask something, I can say. What I want
What
to
is your next project on this?
on this,
On this
not
theme,
immediately,
fine.
yes, but my next project is Science and the Indian National Congress.
Indian
Okay.
National
In
Congress.
another
Before,
book.
Indian National Congress means before
Yeah.
independence.
Independence.
Not after
No, no.
47.
So far, not after 47.
47.
Yeah,
Oh,
maybe.
I'm really worried because one of my students has already started working on PhD on this only.
Acha.
really?
You are going to examine one of the MPhil dissertations which has been submitted, your name.
Acha.
And it's already Indian National Congress in Science a year ago. Oh, you should have told me earlier.
No, but you know, for years I have been
But
doing
that will
working on
result
that.
in a different argument. Not necessarily. Well, both will be belonging to the same Deepak Teddy.
I don't know.
There could be some different argument.
Hey, God's grace, no.
Another thing, which is very relevant is that as an economic historian, I was interested in knowing that, whatever interventions took place and what you call missed opportunities were there. Don't you think British Empire, its economic policies were responsible for this scientific backwardness of India?
Of course, it was. It was very much a response. Their economic
All
policy
right.
was
So,
responsible for
thank
it.
you very much.
Yes.
We are running short of
Uh,
time. I think time is just over.
He's giving
Thank-
an explanation. so
We will continue with that. Thank you very much, Professor Jagdish and Sinha and Professor Alam, Professor Kumar. I think it was a very, very lively discussion.
Yes.
Thanks a lot, and thanks to the viewers also. So thank you very much.